This is part one of my interview with International Space Federation's biophysicist, William Brown. We discuss the biophysics of psychedelics, the dreamlike nature of the universe, and what I call the physics of enlightenment.
Psychoactive medicines like ayahuasca, psilocybin, mescaline. When you look at what they do physiologically is they dampen down the oscillatory, the electrical signaling activity of the neurons. And so like Stuart Hameroff, which we'll probably mention a couple of times in this discussion, he just points out that it's quieting down that peripheral activity of the neuron. It's going to a deeper level. And actually, this symposium I just attended, they were showing studies they had done where the locating the areas where those psychoactive compounds like psilocybin are binding in microtubules. So it's shifting the activity to a higher frequency, more tightly coupled to the field level of the biological domain. Physics is showing that the nature of our reality is much more dreamlike than what is classically considered as material and physical. Because if you start to question what is material, what is physical, what is the origin of mass and the origin of forces, you get to something that you go down to a level where it's not as straightforward as little material, solid physical objects interacting. That's not what you have.
Yeah. So I was looking at, or listening to other people like Thomas Campbell. Do you know Thomas Campbell?
Oh yeah. I've met Thomas
Oh,
Campbell.
you have? Yeah, I bet you have. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he has his big toe, right? My big theory of everything. But I don't know for sure if he covers this, but I have a feeling not, but maybe. But really, I feel like, it has to, the big theory of everything has to also include emotions in our psychology,
Oh, yeah.
and yeah, and I think you guys probably do, but I want to talk about some of that. And like I told you, so what I'm doing is I'm writing a book, and the title is actually called Homo Spiritus, like Homo sapiens to Homo Spiritus, because I feel like we're ascending, but also we're realizing the truth of who we are, and that we are really light beings. And I had that experience, and have had multiple experiences similar to that I'll explain. But I'm really interested in being able to describe this to people so that it's not just my experience, but it actually can show people scientifically, how that is possible. Also, I thought it was interesting because in one of your talks for the Resonant Science Foundation, it was those mini talks that you guys did. I forgot the title of it, but you talked about, at the very end, you said something about Homo sapiens to Homo universalis, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I thought that was really interesting because I had, by that time, had already thought of my title, which was Homo sapiens to Homo spiritus. And then I also, are you familiar with Bashar?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. I've met Bashar in person.
Oh, really? Okay.
So to speak.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
we had
Daryl
a
Anka, yeah.
personal session with Daryl Anka where
Oh,
we were able to ask questions kind of one-on-one with Bashar.
oh, okay. Yeah, I'm doing that next.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. So, okay. So it's all kind of making sense now. So, okay, great. So, but he also said we're going from Homo sapiens to Homo galacticus. Yeah. So I guess what I'd like to do is share some of the information around what I'm going to put in the book, and then ask you questions around it.
Okay.
And to start, I'm going to, and I know I kind of shared this with you before. I don't know if you remember about this experience I had where I basically turned into a light being. I was, it was just a quiet night at home with my daughter, and she wasn't feeling good. And so I was going to lay down next to her and I was going to read my book. And as I went to lay down, all of a sudden, I just didn't feel right. I felt weightless. And at first I was like, did I just get dizzy? Because it was such a strange feeling. And then, so I sat back up, but as I'm doing what I just described, I was noticing that the space around me and the walls and everything was shifting and moving. And I looked out and it really looked like everything was a projection. So it looked like, you know, when you used to go to a movie theater and the projector light would shine through an image of a film. And then if you looked up, you could see that the image was suspended in space before it actually hit the canvas. So it was like just little particles in space, but you could see that it was the forms that are on the image of the frame of film. And so basically that's what it looked like. Everything in my daughter's room looked suspended in space and particle like I could see through it. But I was really sound because I was really present. And I was like, what am I looking at? And then I also noticed that I felt very light, like weightless. I felt like I could see my arms, but they felt at one with the space. They didn't feel different than the space. And so I thought I was having a stroke because I couldn't understand what was happening to me, but there was no pain. And I just felt weightless. And as I'm standing there, I start to feel like I'm like everything's disintegrating and going away. So just like a dream, when we dream at night, and if you wake up slowly from your dream, you can see that the particles or the image is like deteriorating. It's like dissolving away. Well, that's what it looked like. It looked like I was leaving this realm and everything was just dissolving. But I thought I was dying. So I was like, I don't want to die. So, and I don't want to collapse here in front of my daughter. So I went down the hall. And as I was walking, because I felt so weightless, I went to put my hand out to touch the wall and my hand went through the wall. And I was like, oh my God, everything's leaving. Like I thought I was leaving. So anyway, I walk in, my partner was in there and he was like an energy healer. So when he turned around, I said, I think you should call 911. Anyway, long story short, I ended up like, as I'm sitting there, I kept like, I could feel myself leaving, like I was expanding. Now I think what I was doing was just expanding, expanding out. And so basically, and now what I understand, and I'll ask you later, is I felt like basically moving into the vacuum, moving into the field, not knowing myself as the human anymore, but expanding into the field. And so, but I didn't realize that at the time. And so I'm holding his hand and I'm thinking I'm going to die. And all of a sudden the heart's like going bzzz, like that. And I was like, oh my God, this is a stroke. This really is a stroke because the heart was like tachycardia. And then I had this overwhelming gratitude because I thought I was leaving. So I was just expressing all this gratitude for my life. And then a little while later, I felt like I had to throw up. And so I think what was happening was the energy was coming up because like I've never done ayahuasca, but in these plant medicine therapies, that's what happens. So I felt like I had to throw up. And at this point, I'm thinking, oh my God, this really is a stroke. But so we walked to the bathroom. Well, first of all, he was standing next to me. He put his hand in front of my heart and above my head. And at one point I looked up at him and he said, you're having an upgrade. And I didn't know what that meant. And I was like, I don't know. All I know is I'm not dying. I'm staying here. And I kept saying I'm staying. So then we walked down the hall. I throw up. And then I was still here. And I was like, okay, I'm still here. So then we walk down, I said, let's move into the living room. So we walk into the living room. And as we're walking into the living room, suddenly I feel this rush of like what I describe as like liquid electric energy, because I don't have any other terms. And it just went through my whole system. And I felt like light. Every particle of my being felt like light. And I could move my arms, swing my arms like all the way back. My legs could come right up in front of my face. I just felt like light. Like it was like, if you look at the sun, that light, it was like every part of me I felt that all through my entire system. And it was magnificent. It was so beautiful. So my question was like, how is that possible? What happened there? Like, what would be your explanation for that? And also what would be your explanation for my hand going through the wall? And you kind of talked about it a little bit when in our last breakout group. And yeah, and that weightlessness feeling, like how does all of that make sense to you? What could have
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are a couple of considerations because there's more than one way that these kind of experiences can unfold or happen. I wonder. So you did say you felt a rush of energy rising. Have you ever associated that with Kundalini energy?
well, I think that's what happened, but
Uh-huh.
I didn't understand that that's what was happening because
Uh,
all I felt was, I mean, so I felt this like I was leaving. I felt
uh,
this rising up feeling, and at that point, because I'd never felt that before, I just thought it was me leaving my body,
uh-huh, uh-huh,
So I didn't know that that could have been a Kundalini rising experience.
uh-huh. Because with Kundalini, you oftentimes will have a fairly visceral experience of you can feel the energy pouring out of the sacrum, the sacral area,
Mhm.
the base of the spine. And actually, even sometimes it can feel like a hot liquid
Mm.
pouring into your body and shooting up your spine into your head. Um, s- in any case, if it wasn't a full on spontaneous Kundalini activation, um, it definitely involved
Well, I think,
rising Kundalini because
yeah,
kind of goes hand in hand with those kind of experiences. Uh, the
I think it was that, but
mhm, mhm.
I guess I'm just, I mean, I didn't feel heat. It just
Ah,
felt a rising up. I felt like
uh,
I was leaving my body.
uh,
But when I had when I felt that rush this way
uh,
of light, that, I mean, that was the most bliss I can ever imagine. Like,
uh,
I don't think there could be a higher frequency than that. I felt
uh,
like light, like,
uh,
and what I've heard Bashar say is about a true Kundalini rising experience is that it's when every single chakra is in complete harmonic
mhm,
resonance with
mhm,
each
mhm,
other.
mhm,
And
mhm.
so, is that what you think? Would you have described it that way?
Um, well, so uh, you were also though explaining some symptoms, some characteristics of a stroke-like activity. I'm wondering if you had any kind of follow-up, like medical examination. No, okay, okay, yeah, because so I mean, I've had the experience both ways. uh, where one is essentially you can have a uh, physiological state brought on by an illness, essentially, where it suppresses the activity, the peripheral activity of the nervous system.
Mm.
So the peripheral activity of the nervous system, that's electrical signals being intercommunicated amongst the neuronal networks of the brain and
Mm.
the spinal column and neuroskeletal tissue, neuromuscular tissue, I should say.
Mhm.
Uh, um, now, uh, that is a very low frequency um, electrical activity, oscillatory activity, like anywhere from 10 to 100 hertz. And it's kind of our primary screening mechanism because our awareness becomes focused on the perceptions and the information processing occurring in the periphery that are
Mhm.
involved with the activity of the central nervous system. And so that places us in a very specific frame of awareness that is very much in the here and now, and the precepts of that the objects of that perception seem very real to it, despite the fact that we know from the physics that they're not. The objects in our reality aren't quite
Or
as physical as our perception would lead us to believe. So, if you have, like, say, a spontaneous mitigation, suppression, or shutdown of that peripheral electrical activity of the central nervous system, yet the deeper level subcellular electrical and electromagnetic intercommunication activity is still occurring. So that's like within the microtubule networks, within the mitochondrial reticular matrix of the cell. That's much higher frequency. That's processing information in millisecond time intervals. And the deeper you go, it gets to like gigahertz and even terahertz cycles of information processing. And it's going from like cellular to macromolecular to molecular to atomic scale information exchanges, interactions, and processing. So the experience can be brought on in that way, where you're going actually to a deeper level of the information processing that's always occurring within you constitutively. So, some of the most recent studies have shown that like, uh, 1 to 100 hertz range of electrical activity of single neurons in neuronal networks is regulated by a much faster millisecond pulsation, electromagnetic in nature, regulatory pulse from the microtubule neurofilamentary core within the neuron. So, you can actually see this in action. And so, if you have kind of a spontaneous experience where you're going from that periphery to a deeper level, that corresponds with a tighter coupling with the field, and so an expansion into the field. So a deeper level of the information processing within your cellular system corresponding with a expansion into greater accession and coupling with the field. And so, the field, that's what we call space memory, but it's the 0 point energy quantum vacuum fluctuation that everything is comprised of, and is the
made out of.
fabric of space. Yeah.
Yeah. So are you saying that if I lost peripheral awareness, then I would come? I'm not sure I'm following.
Well, it's just like, so say that there was kind of like a stroke-like activity,
Okay.
or you'd even mentioned that your daughter was sick. So, if you perhaps had some of that illness as well, or just were in very strong
Resonance.
empathetic resonant coupling with your daughter, that's possible as well. And it's just that those electrical signals occurring within the neuronal networks of the central nervous system stop, or at least are tuned down to a very low level of activity, so that it's not overpowering some of the more subtle levels of information processing that's occurring.
Okay.
So
So that's one possibility.
one possibility.
Okay.
Yeah. So it just physiologically, you begin processing information at a quantum level. So I mean, I'm not sure how precise that wording is, because even the electrical signaling of neurons involves some quantum mechanical actions. But certainly, once you're at that subcellular level, where you're talking about electromagnetic signaling light in the macromolecular system, that's that's purely in the quantum domain. So, that also has associated with it some of the more phenomenal properties of what you observe in quantum phenomena. So that includes things like non-locality, non-local spatial correlation. So that's part of feeling yourself much more as part of the field.
Mm.
Because when you have total coupling with the unified field, it's a total non-local spatial correlation. It's like
You feel like the field, like
yes, yeah,
you feel
and the information is no longer being only accessed and filtered via the central nervous system perception. The information is being accessed non-locally, almost directly from the field.
yeah. So you Mhm. So basically you can actually become the field,
Well,
or you can know yourself as the field.
know
Actually, that's
yourself as the field,
yeah,
because it's
you
occurring constitutively all the
all
time.
the time. Yeah.
It's just that the way that it's set up, the activity of the central nervous system just overpowers everything else and drowns it out. And so that's why you see things like the psychoactive medicines, like ayahuasca,
Mhm.
psilocybin, mescaline. When you look at what they do physiologically, is they dampen down the oscillatory, the electrical signaling activity of the neurons. And so, like Stuart
Mhm.
Hameroff, which we'll probably mention a couple of times in this discussion, he just points out that it's quieting down that peripheral activity of the neuron. It's going to a deeper level. And actually, this symposium I just attended, they were showing studies they had done where the uh, uh, locating the areas where those psychoactive compounds like psilocybin are binding in microtubules.
Mm. Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
so so it's shifting the activity to a higher frequency, more tightly coupled to the field level of the biological domain.
Yeah, that's interesting because I that's a question I've been wondering, but I wasn't going to bring it up in this conversation. But yes, that's great. Okay, that's interesting. I've heard Bashar also talk about how DMT, it's the concentration of DMT that's released that determines how much the physical mind is focused on the physical reality.
Mm, mhm,
And that makes sense too,
mm,
why you have those experiences that you have when you're under certain plant medicines, right? Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Okay, so then the other method is, or the other way that could have happened.
There's let's say it's general pathways of disruption of the activity of the central nervous system. And so general pathways for that are psychoactive medicines, um, also near death type experiences. So
That's what I thought I had, but
and it sounds like that's more akin to what you were experiencing. So I mean, even just a lack of supply of oxygen or sugars to the brain, probably more likely oxygen, like lack of supply of oxygen to the brain, um, dampens down the ability of the neurons to generate those electrical signals and keep the communication going in those neuronal networks. That's dampened down or sometimes stopped entirely. And so it just, in some circumstances enables the perceptions to go through the finer, more subtle level, the higher frequency communication that's always occurring deep within the neurons.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, that's actually when it happened, because no one could explain to me what had happened. I was like, I thought, did I just have a near death experience? Did I will myself to stay? Because I thought, but since then, that because basically that night I was already on a spiritual journey. Like I was already waking up. I was reading books like the Seth books and Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. I read just Joe Dispenza's book, and I also went to his event, one of his events in Mexico, and where we were doing a lot of meditation. I had also been practicing Kundalini yoga for a long time, and doing certain meditations that were really opening up the chakras. So so initially I thought maybe it was a near death, but after that night, that set me the past 3.5 years, because that was end of December, that was end of 2018. That basically set me on this path of trying to figure out what had happened. And I don't believe it was a near death experience. I believe it was Kundalini Rising, based on all the research that I've done, but at that time I didn't know what it was, and so I thought it was near death. But there was absolutely no pain. I wasn't sick at all. I didn't get sick. But also what I realized is that light, like, it healed everything. I had autoimmune of the thyroid. I had a shoulder injury that was where I couldn't lift my arm past here, and in that instant, like, I was swinging this arm like all over the place. It was going all the way back, and I realized, in that light, no disease can exist, because that's actually, that is what I believe we really are, is that light that I felt. What I want to do in this is, what I'm really trying to describe to people is how to raise their vibration, but also what this reality is, because when you understand what the reality is, that does raise your vibration. And that's why I think that was given to me. And I also, I think of reality as like a dream. So, but first, before I get to that part, I want to talk about another experience I've had where I was in the white light state. And so, like, what Bashar says is, there's the one, right? So, and we can all know ourselves as the one. And that's what happened. And although I didn't realize it until after, when I had heard Bashar, I didn't realize that that's what I was experiencing. But I experienced myself as all that existed was white light. I was meditating. It was early on in my meditation, when I started meditating years and years ago. And I experienced just complete white light, and I was it, and it was pervading everything. And then as soon as I had a thought of like, wow, like, this is amazing, then I popped out of it. And so what he describes is that is the one, becoming self-aware. And when you become self-aware, now there's self and other. And he describes that as the vesica piscis, or the vesica Pisces. So when that one sphere, then like mitosis, basically, of consciousness, I think of it as that. And in that creation is where the vesica Pisces is created. And it's interesting to me that looks like an eye. It's like the shape of an eye. And then he also calls it the womb of creation. He doesn't say that, actually, but when I looked up vesica piscis or vesica Pisces, I found out that that's what they call the womb of creation, which makes complete sense, because then when you open your eyes, or that is actually where space-time, I think, is born out of. Is that, would you say that too?
Well, it gets a little bit challenging because there are the symbolic metaphysical understandings of the process, and the reconciliation or explaining it in terms of the physics is not always direct, because so like the white light, that's a symbolic representation of pure energy and wholeness, because
Mm.
the white contains all frequencies of the
Mhm.
spectrum combined together, and you know uh, that's a high energy state. You could think of
Mhm.
it like that, and so uh, I believe that that's our perception of the 0 point energy field. If we're going to relate this to what we know of the physics
Right.
of the nature of reality, and so the 0 point energy field, the energy density of the 0 point field is unimaginably large. If you consider all potential frequencies, all potential wavelength modes, oscillatory modes, it has an infinite energy density.
Mhm.
If you use a cutoff of the Planck frequency, then it has like 10 to the 113 joules per meter squared, which is, um, it, in a meter, in the cubic meter, there's more energy than the observable universe.
Yeah, and also how would you explain that? So in terms of like what that would mean for someone. So how much, I think I heard this somewhere, that to fuel the globe for a year, it would takes like how much energy would that one cube, sugar cube volume of space would fuel the globe for how long?
Well, you actually can't even do that computation because the energy is so great. I mean,
It would it would be years or decades.
well, because you'd actually you have to take it down to even start to do those kind of
Mm.
comparisons. I mean, you don't even consider a cubic meter as ZPE, a 0 point energy density,
Right, because it's just
because
a renormalization, right?
it's more energy output than the entire universe,
Yeah.
the entire observable universe.
Yeah.
So, you know, the amount of energy in a cubic meter of the 0 point energy density, you could create another universe.
Mhm.
you know, so it's like, I mean, if you're talking about like just say that you could access a fraction of that energy density, then you would have a limitless supply of energy. It could, uh, you know, power. It could satisfy global energy needs indefinitely.
Indefinitely.
A-
Okay.
And that's like I'm talking about like accessing 0.00001% of that energy density. It would
Yeah.
so satisfy our energy requirements indefinitely. And actually, what it would do is transform our civilization, because you can look at it as like the Kardashev scale. Right now, we're a Type 0 civilization, which means that we generate and access all of our energy via dead plant matter,
Mm.
which is a kind of interesting way of accessing energy that was stored from the sun. As a Type 0 civilization, if once you begin obtaining the capability to access the 0 point energy density, you immediately jump to like a Type 1 civilization, Type 2 civilization. And this is just meaning that you have the access, the energy accession capabilities of like the energy output of an entire star or an
Mm.
entire galaxy. And so with that, you can do, pretty amazing things, phenomenal things.
How long do you think we're before we get there?
Yeah, well, if you look at the past 100 years, we could have already gotten there.
Mm.
It's just that I don't know if it was orchestrated or just unfortunate decisions in part on the physics community and uh, the scientific community in general, just that, there was this decision made that we were going to disregard the field.
Mhm.
In the 19th century parlance, it was the luminiferous ether.
Mhm.
That there was this kind of decision made to stop considering field-like resonance
But
interaction.
are you guys working on this? You guys are working on this kind of technology,
Oh
right?
yeah. So that's our primary objective.
Yeah.
We can look back and see where there was opportunities even in the past 100 years that this technology could have already
Mhm. Yeah,
been developed.
I saw was it Stephen Greer's The Lost Century and How to yeah, I saw
That's a
that.
great
Yeah.
example of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we're focused on
That
developing technology that is going to access that energy, and part and parcel with that is being able to engineer the space-time manifold. So being able to modulate the geometry of space that is gravitational control. So that would immediately enable us to become a interstellar species, and very quickly you're stepping into the realm of Homo galactic,
mhm. Black,
Homo universalis.
yeah, Homo
Yeah,
universalis, yeah.
yeah.
So are you guys already doing it or can you say?
Oh well, I can't share details
Yeah.
of yeah, because it's definitely a fine line on the in intellectual property stuff. And it's just also just that you know I don't want to give anybody high expectations, because one of the things about this is it's one of the most challenging things in the world to do. you know
Well,
uh,
I wonder, so it's interesting because I know that there are some people that can levitate, right?
mhm,
And
mhm.
so they're tapping into that field in order to produce more radiation out. Is that correct? And that's what's lifting them? Would that be so? Tapping into the vacuum and being able to radiate out that energy, would that be what is happening? Is that so there's more coming out than going in the vortex, basically? Is that what you would need to happen in order to have anti-gravity?
Well, it's more of a transmutation
Uh,
process. And so, so that also ties into like your experience of being able to or having your hand go through the wall.
Wow.
And so it's just that uh, when you're able to bring your body's physiological activity uh, down to those higher frequency levels. So if you're able to get it at the level where the primary level of activity, of interaction, of information processing, of energy exchange that's always occurring within the body, if that is occurring primarily at the level of like the atomic scale,
Mhm.
that's extremely high frequency for one thing. So you're talking about terahertz, it's trillions of interactions per second, versus at a more peripheral level, like out in the cellular cytoplasm with macromolecules. You're talking at most maybe a million interactions per second, but more likely thousands to tens of thousands of interactions per second, so kilohertz type range. Well, so it's just that as you go to those higher frequency levels, you're expanding out more into the field, and you're coupling at a finer resolution to the field. And so, if you are coupling the energy and information exchange always occurring within your body at the or close to the Planck
Mhm.
level, the Planck resolution of the field,
Yep.
then you can do things that seem to bypass the normal suggestions of physics. So some call them laws of physics, but they're kind of like rules, but they're more like suggestions of physics, like the gravitational force that, if you're in Earth's gravitational field, you must be accelerating to the center of the Earth at 9.8 meters per second per second. But that force, that emergent force, is a function of the flow of the Planck plasma. The flow dynamics of space-time is generating this emergent acceleration force. If though you are going to a finer resolution, a micro scale level interactivity with the Planck field, you're able to bypass or circumvent that macro scale level of activity. So things like a collection of atoms that's a pattern of the Planck, coherent pattern of the Planck field.
Mhm.
At a macro scale, it generates a force field, an electromagnetic force field, and that's what makes it feel solid.
Right.
Because the electromagnetic force field of your hand pushes against the electromagnetic force field of the wall. But if it's at a finer scale, at a micro scale, those individual Planck particles in a coherent phase don't necessarily have to interact with that force field. So their interactions are occurring at a level below which
Right.
emergent force is apparent. And it's same with the gravitational force. So you can bypass the macro scale emergent forces if you're functioning at the level of like close to the Planck scale interaction. And so, it kind of all ties together because so you were seeing this bright white light, so that's you're accessing the 0 point energy level. You're now exchanging energy and information through your body at the level of the Planck scale, where you basically have direct access to the ZPE. And so you could think of it that now more energy is radiating through your body. But overcoming the forces, electromagnetic force, gravitational force, overcoming those interactions isn't necessarily requiring more energy output than what they have, overpowering them in that sense. It can be as simple as like constructive wave interference.
I see.
Yeah.
Or I kind of see. So I guess what I'm wondering is, so when you're working at that level, you're basically, I mean, the way that my mind wants to look at it is you're basically, you've brought your consciousness down to the Planck level, to the vacuum, right? And that's really our true self. That's who I believe is our true self, right? So now when you are at that level, the amount of energy that you are, I mean, that's the highest frequency, right? So, and it's light. I mean, it's not, there's not that, I guess the way you would put it is you don't have that electromagnetic energy field that's creating separation between things, right? Or creating a barrier. Is that what you're saying? Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, let me see if I can explain it a little bit more clearly, because you're right on about it that so at that level it's light, but so that is it's electromagnetic harmonic oscillators. So oscillating fluctuations of electromagnetic energy. So it's light. Now when you have a coherent phase of those electromagnetic oscillators of the Planck field, they can form a larger coherent pattern,
Mhm.
a coherent assembly. Now, that's going to have a very specific topology and geometry. So, for example, like a double torus
Mhm.
type topology. And with that kind of geometry, you form like a dipole. Now it's a dipole oscillator, north and south pole going through the vortex, the two hemispheres of the dual vortex. Um, that can establish like a north and south magnetic field, uh, um, as well as when uh, electromagnetic fields of that Planck field that's light, when that electromagnetic field traverses through that kind of structure, um, you also need to consider the geometry, the space-time geometry of it. The space-time geometry of it is multiply connected. So these dipole oscillators are entangled, connected, and the spatial geometry of that is an Einstein-Rosen bridge or wormhole. When an electromagnetic field line threads through that, it becomes a electric charge. Because if you look at the tail end, let's say that now corresponds to a negative charge, and if you look at the where the electromagnetic field lines are emerging from that micro wormhole, it's like a positive charge. So now you can establish electrostatic fields, and I was using the just more general
Yeah,
description of it as an electromagnetic interaction, but it's an electrostatic field,
which
and
is
so
what
now
creates the feeling of separateness or a feeling of a particle or a matter, basically.
it's those electrostatic fields is why you don't fall through your chair when
Right.
you're sitting
Yeah. Okay.
because
Yeah.
yeah, because the electrostatic fields of the molecules in your body, it's electrically charged. It's a like a force field of electrical charge that pushes against the field of electrical charge of the chair, the molecules of the chair.
Mhm.
Um, but so that's a very that's a macro scale level emergent force.
Right.
So it emerges when you have a coherent assembly of a large number of these Planck dipole oscillators.
Right. Okay.
That's the Planck plasma. Now, uh, so if you're interacting again at the peripheral level, at a macro scale, those force fields are as tangible as anything can get.
Hmm.
That wall is solid.
Right.
There's no getting around it, and that force of gravity is pushing you down, and there's no getting around that. But if you are not moving matter and energy at the macro scale, so when you have the volition to move your hand, your consciousness is moving matter.
Hmm.
Your
Yeah.
consciousness is moving all the atoms and molecules of your arm across space-time. Well, if your consciousness is at a level where it's not moving entire, trillions of molecules and billions of cells, but it's instead moving Planck dipole oscillators,
Mm.
well, then you're at a level that's below the emergent forces,
Mhm.
the emergent gravitational force, emergent electromagnetic force. Now it's like uh, the Planck plasma particles over here and the Planck plasma of the wall and the Planck plasma particles of your hand, they can just
Mm.
slide right past each other, bypassing that force. Same with like a gravitational interaction. So a human, we can manifest those kind of capabilities, levitation, traversing through a wall. And then also, if you're considering that multiply connected geometry of those plasma particles, you're also talking about non-local spatial correlation. So you can also do things like telepathy,
Yeah.
remote viewing,
Or
all these
yeah.
more,
Yeah. Telekinesis and
Mhm.
yeah, that's interesting because one thing that Bashar said is if you want to move, like this little girl was talking to him about moving water. She said she's trying to get water to move just using her mind. And he said, when you become no different than the water, you will move the water. And that's basically you becoming the field, right? You knowing yourself as the field or working at that level like you're describing, right?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
if 100% is understood in your mind that the separation between what you think of as your arbitrarily constructed self,
Right.
and the objects around you, if there's a 100% understanding that is a illusionary
Exactly.
separation, then what really is the difference between moving your hand and moving an object, or even water, like in your vicinity? That there are some distinctions that do make that a fairly challenging thing to do.
Yeah.
But if you can get to that level, there is no difference between
Yeah.
moving your hand and something else in the vicinity, an object in your vicinity.
Yeah. I'm really starting to understand, how these miracles that like occur, are written about in the Bible, for example, how they have occurred. And there's actually humans on the planet that have been able to do certain things like that, now I'm starting to understand how that's possible. And one of the things that really helps me to understand that is because, that experience of being the white light and then coming out of it, and when you really pay attention to what happens there, if you ever had that experience, you coming out of the white light or me coming out of the white light, and then me, staying in the state of me just knowing I exist and knowing there's something other than me, basically where the vesica piscis is created, right? And then knowing that so what Bashar says is when that happens, what's created, consciousness creates a different form of consciousness, and that's the vacuum, the field. And he says it's a self-reflective field, right? It's a self-reflective substance. So basically everything that's created in that field, which is what I believe is space-time, the illusion of space-time is us. It's created out of our consciousness, just like a dream. So when we dream at night, we think that whole dream that seems real, that seems like everything's, the material objects in that dream seem real. The empty space in the dream seems real. The people in the dream seems real. The dream self seems real. It's all an illusion, right? And I believe in my experience and listening to Bashar and everything else I've read is, this is just another dream. This physical world is just another dream. And that's what I think, especially what you guys are putting out there, the science that you're putting out there is proving to humanity that it's just a dream. And the Nobel Prize in entanglement is showing that as well, right? The objective reality is not real. Would you say that that's true?
Not exactly.
No? Okay.
No, yeah.
What, first of all, yeah, that's actually something I did want to ask you. So what did they do to prove that reality is not objectively real?
So, the physics is showing that the nature of our reality is much more dreamlike than what is classically considered as material and physical. Because if you start to question what is material, what is physical, what is the origin of mass and the origin of forces, you get to something that you go down to a level where it's not as straightforward as little material solid physical objects interacting. That's not what you have.
Right.
No,
It's not, yeah.
you're talking about information dynamics and energy relationships. And one of the next steps is how consciousness couples to energy and information dynamics. Well, it does so intricately,
Yeah.
integrally and intricately.
Well, wouldn't you say that it's one and the same, that the field is consciousness? Like,
Yeah.
just like yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
basically a mind, right?
Yeah.
It's a mind.
Mhm.
And the way I look at it is, sorry, I interrupted you.
No problem. Yeah.
The way that I look at it is, just like we have a dream at night, all of that is born out of our consciousness,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Those material objects, everything is born out of our consciousness, right? And just like when we're in the dream, we think that dream self is real, right? We don't know we're dreaming
Mhm.
until we either slowly wake up out of the dream and you start to see the dream dissolve,
Mhm.
which is basically what happened to me that night, or you wake up in the dream and you realize I'm dreaming, right? So when you're in the dream, though, and you're asleep in the dream, everything seems real.
Mhm.
And the backdrop of all of that is really your consciousness. It's your mind, and you're the dreamer, the one who's laying in bed dreaming this, has a whole mind that the dream self doesn't have access to.
Mhm.
Right? It has all this information that the dream self doesn't have access to. And what my point is that's what we're doing here too.
Mhm.
Right?
Oh, no. Well, the dream state and this state is generated in much the same way. One of the key differences is just that this state is much more of a gestalt. So there are contributions and synchronization from a myriad of inputs.
Yes. From
So
other dreamers. Is that what you're
exactly,
saying? Yeah.
exactly. Now, even in your dream state, though, it's not 100% just your
Yes, that's
contribution.
right.
There are other
Interacting. Yeah.
contributions occurring because you can actually interact with
Others.
aware entities, aware
Yeah.
agents, even in your dream
Yeah.
state. And if you're lucid and you think that you're going to that they're just a
A
projection of
figment
your
of your, yeah.
consciousness, and you're going to be able to, you'll be surprised.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%, but I would
Mhm.
say that sometimes they maybe or maybe not. But
Yeah,
basically what
mhm.
what I believe is pretty much, so in Vedanta, which is the science of consciousness, are you familiar with Vedanta?
I don't think
I
so.
think
No.
you'd really be into this
Oh.
because, okay, so I think every physicist, if they're going to study the nature of reality, they need to study Vedanta.
Hmm.
And
I'll
Vedanta
look
is
it up.
yeah, so Vedanta, and I can introduce you to a really good teacher because he's just
Hmm.
he's exceptional when it comes to teaching this, because really it's the science of consciousness, but not the physical, not
Hmm.
physics, right? But what it does is it uses your unexamined logic of your experience. So for example, if I hold up this pen and I ask you, where do you experience this? You would say, if you're in the room, you might say over there, right?
Mhm,
You'd
mhm.
say over there.
It's over there in your
It's
hand.
over there in your hand. But really, you know it because it occurs in your awareness,
Mhm.
right? So it is an object appearing in your awareness, right? So is it above your awareness or below your awareness?
Mhm.
Right? No, it's in your awareness, right? And where is your awareness relative to you?
You are your awareness.
You are your awareness. So what does that mean?
Mhm.
If
The pen is you.
the pen is you.
Mhm, mhm. Actually at this symposium I just attended on neurophysiology, the nature of consciousness, that kind of thing. There was a scientist who made almost this exact argument, and it's just pointing out that the objects of our perception, that we may think of as out there over there. There's probably even in from that kind of Newtonian perspective, a separable space-time and objects in that space-time arena being separate and distinguishable. Even within that perspective, there is, when you are perceiving an object, there's probably an entanglement, a quantum entanglement occurring. So that even in a physical, literal sense, it is in your mind and a part of you. The
Yeah.
important distinction to make on the Nobel Prize that was given for entanglement,
Oh,
and
God.
why I don't think it's a great idea to use that as an example of, why what we think of as real isn't real in the same way that in the classical
Oh, okay.
sense of
Okay.
material physical things. So what you have there is that there are really two predominant interpretations of the results of quantum mechanical experiments. Uh, very specific, a very specific class of quantum mechanical experiments called Bell's inequalities. This physicist, John Bell, established back in the 70s, I believe it was in the 70s, a set of mathematical formalisms that showed that if you conduct a series of experiments like measuring the spin polarization of atoms or photons generated in an experiment, that the correlation between them, if it's classical, should be like 50-50. 50% of the time it's like spin up, 50% of the time spin down, and that's the correlation between any two particles. 50% of the time, one spin up, one spin down. And it, so I want to make sure that I explain this without getting too much into the technical
Okay.
milieu. But so when those experiments were ran, it was found that Bell's inequalities that would explain a purely classical world, a purely classical correlation, were always violated. It was not a 50-50 observance of the probability of spin up or spin down as a simplistic example. It's much more complicated than that, but just to keep it simplistic, it's more like 2/3 probability outcome. And so there's two ways that has been interpreted. Now, one of them is what's called non-local hidden variables. So that means that the two particles are entangled, and that entanglement involves a connection between them that is non-local, which is another way of saying that it's beyond Einstein's relativity theory.
Okay.
Because the foundation of Einstein's relativity theory is that nothing interacts faster than the speed of light. There's no instantaneous interactions. That's how you get the relativity of simultaneity. That's how things are all relative, because it takes the speed of light for communications to occur, which takes time. It's not instantaneous. Now, for one reason or another, most physicists are very much appalled to non-locality. And I guess it's primarily because it's perceived erroneously that it violates general relativity theory and faster than light signaling, faster than light interactions. So most physicists, instead of admitting non-local connections, they say that they go with the other primary predominant interpretation that the particles aren't real. And that way they can do anything up until the point that they're observed or measured. And if that anything is faster than light interaction is no problem, because they didn't really exist up until that point of measurement or observation. So anything they did is virtual. It's inconsequential. So there is the ardent class of those who adhere to local only interactions. So only the fastest that any interaction can occur is at the speed of light. That's the fastest any interaction can occur. And so the particles prior to measurement or observation are a wave function. And the wave function is actually just a mathematical representation of the knowledge of the experimenter, of the observer, of the human. Now, this is, I believe, in erroneous interpretation. And it's just wrought with all kinds of problems. It's really an untenable position to be in, which is why I don't think, even though it has the specious appearance of being in accordance with many metaphysical precepts, it's actually not. So it's kind of it's a specious, alluring interpretation, because what it does is it introduces the measurement problem and the observer problem, because it almost requires in many cases that the human is given special status as the observer, but really that's an arbitrary distinction. So
Well, you know, oh, go ahead, finish that.
Well, just any system in the universe can play the role of the observer or measurement, and that's really for a number of reasons. But on a metaphysical perspective, that's really because consciousness is everywhere. So at what point is that particle not being observed? So if you're taking the perspective that it was traveling and not being observed, it was unknown to the ubiquitous consciousness that is the field. That's an untenable situation.
Yeah, it's interesting because, okay, so when you think about so I'm going to go back to the dream, and these are just ideas, okay? So, well, and also because I have this other information. So what I really believe is that this is a dream. But and part of that is, so think about when you are, if you've listened to Bashar enough, you know about like the higher mind and the lower mind, right?
Oh, yeah.
So wouldn't you say that so you said it's giving the human special status, but what if you take into account the higher mind, right? So the part of in a way, I think of the higher mind as the part that's dreaming this dream, right? And that part is always aware too, right? So,
well, but so, for the higher mind, if you go high enough into the higher mind, it knows what the particle is doing before
right,
your measurement apparatus collapses the wave function, collapses the superposition. So in that way, the particle to the higher mind always has a position and a velocity. It's not in a superposition. And in terms of the entanglement, to the higher mind, it knows what the correlation is between the entangled particles, which in the orthodox quantum formalism, that all that knowledge isn't known until the measurement takes place. So it's just that the correct interpretation of it, I believe, is that there are non-local connections. So things can interact even when it seems like it is a faster than light interaction. Now, relativity is still maintained because as uh, Kramer, the founder of the transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics, puts it, the hidden variables are buried so hidden that they're invisible. But
Well,
the solution is just that your entangled particles are connected via space-time geometry and Einstein-Rosen bridge, and so that is a solution, a geometry within relativity that allows for faster than light interaction. And so the entangled particles are Einstein-Rosen bridges.
so I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around is when, there's, so I think, okay, so space-time is an illusion. Would you agree with that?
Well,
Just like a dream is an illusion.
yes, yeah,
Yeah. So
yes.
space-time is an illusion. Now, within space-time, when you're in the illusion, you have basically physics that describes how things work when you're coming from the perspective of being in the illusion, right? But when you take your consciousness beyond the illusion, so you're still in the dream, but you take your consciousness beyond the illusion, now you become the container, right? So now things like faster than light communication or two things being entangled, they start to make sense because you are now that you are the container and you know everything instantaneously. It's what you become, the container, the mind that's dreaming the dream. Right. So I feel like these, like, wormhole is what happens when you're in the dream. It explains how that things are happening when you're inside the dream, when you think that the dream is real, right? Now, when you take your consciousness beyond the dream, you're awake in the dream, but your mind is now, you know yourself as the container. Now it explains why there is instantaneous communication, right? Why there is this entanglement between these two particles, because it's one mind, it's you, right? Or your higher
Well, I think that it goes back to what you are describing in that kind of experience is just that you're taking your level of awareness and the level of the sphere of influence of your cognition, of your awareness, to the Planck scale resolution, and that is beyond space time,
right.
because time is a holographic projection of this more fundamental level. Um, so when you're at that level, things like space and time have, if they have any meaning at all, it's very different than our experience of space time in this kind of illusionary realm. And so, at that level, if a configuration of those Planck qubits, those dipole electromagnetic oscillators, is connected to another configuration and interacting, um, from a space-time perspective, that might, we would call that, or it would appear as a Einstein-Rosen bridge, a wormhole connection.
Right. Yeah.
Now, at that level of the Planck scale resolution, it might be a little bit different on how exactly you would perceive that connection, that connectivity network, because all what we think of as past, present, and future, it's all present,
Here now. Yeah.
yeah, instantaneously.
Yeah. So, I mean, so really, having this understanding that Vedanta gives to you, I think would help every physicist understand reality better, because I had that experience. I had the knowledge of Vedanta. I had the experience that I had with the Kundalini Rising, the white light experience. And then I had, for the past 3 years since COVID hit, I was spent every day, multiple hours a day, going deep within my own heart, really going deep, deep within the heart and going to different levels of my own consciousness. And that helped me understand what reality is. And then I found you guys. and basically, because I wanted to write a book, but I was like, who's going to believe me? Like, just me having my own experience. I needed the science to prove what I'm trying to say in this book. And that is that reality is a dream. It's occurring in our minds. We are the space that it's occurring in. This is happening in our own minds, and you can start to wake up to that. And that's basically what enlightenment is. So enlightenment is when the dream self expands their awareness enough to realize that they're in a dream, right? And what happens when that, so like think about when you're in your dream at night, when you're sleeping, if you were to slowly wake up in the dream, you're still in the dream, but you realize, wow, everything around me is my own mind and I can make anything happen, right? So that would be the same as what you kind of just described as you working at the vacuum level, right? Or the PSU level.
Exactly.
Right? Because you would be asleep in the dream, but you'd realize this is all me. And when you stay aware of yourself like that, you can control things, right? And that's what enlightenment is that self-awareness, being self-aware all the time and realizing that you're in a dream. That's really what enlightenment is. And that's what Vedanta teaches you. So it uses your unexamined logic of our experience to prove to you that you are pure. You're actually not just consciousness. You are beyond your existence itself. You're beyond consciousness, right? So it teaches you that you are the existence beyond consciousness. Everything is one thing. And when you have that experience of really seeing that, like, this is occurring inside my awareness, and that means everything here, including the physical body, is inside me, then when you really, at least for me, when I really, really got that, I could see that how everything was one thing. It was all one thing, and it was occurring inside my mind. So it looks separate, but it's really me. And when I had that, when that integrated into my human mind, I was like, oh my God, this is me. This whole reality is me. And it made me just like love it. Like I likened it to when I had my daughter, when she was in my belly. I was like, she's me. She's my child, right? Me, you just like love that child. And when I realized that this is all happening inside of me, I mean, it was just like, I loved it. I was like, it's when we like really understand this, and you guys are bringing the science to this, I think it's going to really change humanity, how we behave. And then things like what you put out, you get back. It all starts to make sense, right? And what you blesses you, because the field is you.